Okay, so welcome to Thursdays with Franco, where we talk things around autonomous and Apex. And with me today, I've got Stuart and Jason. Hey, Stuart.
Morning, how are you?
Good. And Jason.
Morning, Franco. How are you this morning?
I'm even better for being on this webcast with you guys. So our topic today is it's actually about me sharing my homemade IoT solution, where I learned a little bit about Python and what I could do with Apex. And I'll get you guys to maybe give me a hard time or ask me a few questions.
Yeah, definitely so.
Always.
Happy to give you a hard time.
Always. You mean about your spelling and things like that, or?
No, we fixed all that stuff up. We fixed that
Okay.
up before. But Franco, one of the things I know, this is something that you've been doing for a little while, right? So tell us more about where this sort of came from.
So, as you know, we've this little group, which you guys are a part of, we're always, what I'd say, working out what's possible with data from different places. Whether it was the old Anki race cars or weather stations or beehives, a variety of things. And we also played with these things called beacons, probably about 4 years ago.
Yeah, we had the drones as well.
We did. That's where we first discovered things like Node.js code and Python and Bluetooth. So about 2 years ago, and it was interesting. Both you guys reminded me. It was actually 2 years in June. We bought these devices here on the left, known as Ruby devices, and you can get a pack of 3 for less than $100. I think when I bought them, they were about 50 or 60 Australian dollars. And I think they're Arduino devices, but these little devices capture where they are, they capture motion, they capture temperature, humidity, acceleration, these sorts of things. And as they're capturing all of that, they make it available so you can see the data. So we worked out what we could do with these devices. This is what the actual device looks like. I've got one here in front of me. And I've also got I've got 2 Raspberry Pis here, one that I'm using and one to actually show. And then from there, we've worked out how to get that into the things we've been talking about for the last 5 or 6 weeks, which is obviously an autonomous database, REST API, JSON, working out how to blend that with a bit of SQL, and heaven forbid, have it running on my mobile phone as an Apex application. So do you want to see what the JSON data
I've got a bone to pick with you though, Franco, because this is only for the people on this call, but you're giving out our secret sauce for how we've done every IoT demo for the last 5 years. In fact, what you're doing is what we did for Anki, as you mentioned. It's also what we do right up to the F1 simulator that we're using right now, and the soon-to-be launched rocket, where we're using this functionality to do exactly the same. So obviously different devices that are creating data, but the process you're using, and obviously with things like the F1 simulator, the amount of data is significantly higher than what you're doing. But this is the secret sauce. So you're going to put me out of a demo job. Good work.
So yeah, it is, and that's the point you're making. You're saying, hey, it's actually not that hard, and I can make myself look good for the people that need this sort of functionality, and it looks highly techy, but it's not that techy.
And can be repurposed for pretty much any situation that requires data ingestion and some sort of screen view.
Yeah. So I know Jason Lowe loves to look at JSON data.
Of course I do.
So let's have a look at what comes off that Ruby device. So here you can see we got that acceleration, X, Y, and Z. We've got the movement. We got little delta sequences. Look, there's a temperature thing there, acceleration. There's actually what we call a MAC address, which is like an IP identifier. There's the actual transmission power and the current battery. And the actual data can come in a variety of formats. I think this one is data format number 5. So it comes in that. So how do I get the data off there? And as Stuart has said, it's actually not that complicated. And I did not write any of the Python code. The Python code, if you actually Google Ruby and GitHub, you will be able to bring that data down. And so this is, very little of the stuff is what I've actually written here. So this is just the Python code. I did talk to Stuart about, hey, how do I get this JSON bit of data into the autonomous database? And he said, hey, we can use a REST API and actually load it in there. And we'll have a look at that shortly. So this is just an autonomous database REST API, also known as the ORDS mechanism. And here's us getting the payload ready, but then we actually load that payload with this thing called the sensor state, which is just this data here. And then we actually send that as a HTTP post. And that's how you do that there. And there's the sensor update actually going in there. Now, when you look at this bit of code, there's lots of things that you would ask questions about. I've actually got one of these per Ruby device. I've got one of these per Ruby device. So when you look at my Raspberry Pi screen, it actually looks like this. So you can see I've, right mouse clicked on the place where I've got those scripts, and then I just go Python 3, script 1, script 2, script 3, and this thing just runs. There's lots of other questions.
You don't know the meaning of the word efficiency, do you?
So Frankie, show us this actually working, mate, because
yeah,
and because it's interesting in terms of you've got these currently in the Adelaide office.
Yes.
So tell us what you're going to show us.
So it's a good point. These have been running at my home for the last 2 years. It did take a little bit of effort to realize, hey, I need to move this here into the Adelaide office. So let me just talk a little bit about what I've got. We've actually got that JSON document sitting in a table called Ruby, which we've got that REST API built upon. And that JSON document could be for anything, but it happens to be for that Ruby content that sits in there. And then we've got a supporting product table, which has got a group and a product, and you can see I've got min and max. And to support Jason Lowe's drinking habits, I want to provide a quality drinking experience for Jason. So we've got one of the Ruby devices in the freezer, and that's for his limoncello. We've got another Ruby device in the fridge, and that's for his tonic water. And we've got another one for his gin. So that's for keeping it at room temperature, which is a real challenge in places like Brisbane. Whereas when I spoke to Stuart was less thinking about himself and thinking more about healthcare. So he was, we need to look after the Pfizer vaccine in the freezer, the AstraZeneca in the fridge, and the Moderna in the room. So, we've effectively supporting, as Stuart said, 2 demos or 2 applications here, and it ends up looking something like this. So we got limoncello, gin, and tonic, and we've got that there. So I'm actually going to now go from showing you a set of slides, and we're going to go walk through a few of these. Let's actually show this is live. So we'll actually count how many of these Ruby documents. We'll then look at how we see it, the JSON itself, and then we'll blend some JSON with SQL. So this is me going jv.json document, looking at temperature, MAC address, and then showing how we've mapped that to a product table. So we'll actually execute that, and we'll show you the SQL and then get into the Apex app. So let's get out of this mode and go into having a look at this live. So here I am, and you can see the last time I ran this, we had 1.2 million records with 899 there. I'm just going to go off and run that again. You can see it's 121. So we've gone from that 39 to 121. If I wait long enough and hit run again, it's 122. And if I talk for a little bit longer, it's going to be 123.
You're not going to do this for 40 minutes, are you?
Show us again. Show us again.
Sorry.
So I'm now going to actually show you that data that's in there. And you can see here, I'm saying timestamp minus interval 30 seconds. I'm also going to admit, Stuart did suggest, because being an old time Oracle guy, I like to use sysdate, but Stuart said, hey, that's actually, you're showing your age there. You start to use timestamp so you can be a little bit more modern. So I will just show, I'm going to hit the run thing here. And we're now just looking at that JSON document per se. So you can start to see that. And then that next SQL statement is actually looking at it. Once again, very similar, and I'll hit run. And we can start to see that. I'm going to change that from alcohol to vaccine. Let's see if I can spell that right. V8 vaccine, and hit run. And we're pulling back exactly the same data, but we're mapping it to that application. So you can see we're mixing SQL with JSON. And for people that don't like having to think in those two different ways, we've created, or Stuart actually created a view here that shows that data as if it was a relational table. And I'll just click SQL here, and that's actually showing how you can create a view over that JSON document. And Stuart actually decided, hey, given we care about the devices, we've actually created it as an Oracle partition. We could have done it differently. We could have done it on some other element of data, but we actually did it over on that. So let's go into, we've actually got our little environment where we're building Apex apps. Let's get into the actual application itself. So this is running live on the actual data here. So if I just go, you can see at the moment from a vaccine perspective, we've got this thing, the Moderna at 23, the room temperature one in my hand, the Pfizer in the freezer, the AstraZeneca there. If I click refresh, you can see the numbers have changed slightly. And we've got exactly the same data being seen, but you can see here the gin, room temperature, the limoncello, and the tonic water, and we're looking at the data. So that's the last reading. This is looking at the data in the last 3 minutes. We're actually looking at the data in the last 10 minutes with the average, with the gin. I'm actually exercising how to use those. I think it's box plot graphs with the whiskers. I know Stuart loves those, they're his favorite. The limoncellos and the tonic water, and that was for the last 10 minutes. And you can see here for the last 10 hours, yes, I did get into the office at around about 7 a.m. this morning to make sure we had enough data to actually show here.
So just explaining those spikes on that graph, the the graph assumes when there's no, so because you've got different timestamps of the reads coming in, the graph is assuming if there's no record at that point, then it's nil. or 0. So that's why it spikes. So normally you'd have that as a line where the line is variable, so it doesn't reset to 0. But that's just a graph setting. So we'll teach you how to do that afterwards, Franco.
That, yeah, I left that there on purpose so you could make that comment, Stu.
Well, yeah, and it's a more interesting graph because the variation is quite low. So because it looks like a sawtooth, it obviously is more interesting in that respect.
Now, the other thing worth mentioning, so actually, let me go to that little configuration. You heard me talk about the different application of how we've set this up. So I've got this grouping called alcohol, gin, limoncello, tonic, vaccine. I could do one around food now. I could do another one around, you know, could say produce, etc. The key driver behind that is those MAC addresses that you can see here. You can see that the limoncello MAC address E689 is the same as the Visor one. And that's how I've been able to configure that. I've got another thing here called Explore. So I'll just show you that where I've got from to, you can pick a particular time, particular limoncello. And so I've actually said, can you give me a small snapshot? It tells me how many records, what was the max temperature, what was the min temperature, the average, and for the statistically minded out there, there's the mode and the median as well. So just Stuart suggested, why don't you show off some of those statistical SQL algorithms? And then we've got the aggregate by minute, aggregate by hour in here as well. A little bit on how we could do this so quickly. If I click on the vaccine page and I bring up the Apex app, while it looks like there was a lot of work done specifically because of that, the only thing I had to do to get all of this stuff up and going was I just defined what the grouping was. So, you know, so all I did was put vaccine or alcohol, and I quickly was able to clone and create a new page.
So remind us that you don't even need to clone the page. You can use a thing called application items in Apex. So we'll use that as another subject because, again, on that efficiency note, you don't need to create 3 pages for 3 subjects. You can create 1 page and essentially have your filters as part of the app. In fact, for a demo I just did, I've used cookies now. So I know it's controversial using cookies, but I wanted to find out how we could incorporate cookies into Apex so that you can set them for your specific use case. So so I've used a combination of cookies and the application items to store that grouping that you're talking about there. So you just change it once and you're good to go across the whole app.
That's pretty cool. So what you're highlighting to me is I've actually thinking I was being efficient. I wasn't thinking efficiently enough. I could have been even one more step efficiently.
Yeah, because if you want to change the page, you've now got to go change it in 3 places. So you obviously don't want to do that. So
no, that's good. That's good. So Stuart, Jason, I'm actually nearly at the tail end of my little show and tell. Yeah, we've sort of gone through a number of those things.
Do you want to show us what the REST API looks like? Are you keen to just do that?
That's a really good point. I totally overlooked that, Stuart. So let's go, maybe click on that. I'll go duplicate tab. Let's move this out the way and go REST API. And that's actually a really good point, Stuart, because that was one of the areas that you helped me come up with a better way of doing it. And so we've got obviously a get and a post. So simply, I'll just show that. So here's the get. That does that select JSON serialize. So I'll go copy and I'll show that and go Control V and click here. There's the data. If I wanted to, I could put an order by in there or change it. But Stuart, do you want to talk about what you got me to do with the post?
Yeah, sure. So in past versions of the database, when JSON document was basically a text field that you'd store as a clob or a very large text field, or what you could do is when you receive your API data, you then parse that body text into the various fields. What we did is we simplified it massively. This used to be about 20 lines of code to actually get the data from the REST API and then just have it that we could just write it straight into the database. But you can see there, it's now actually one line. So if you get rid of the begin and end, it's just an insert into. So the code there, it pulls in an ID, which is just a system generated UID, GUID. So that's just system generated, so we don't worry about what that looks like. We don't really care. But the JSON document is exactly what is being sent from the source device. So we're using the body text of the API call. And the good news is at this point, we don't care what the data looks like. So when Franco created that view, we do care. That's why that data format field was important. But essentially, we don't care at this point. So we just get the data into the database and we worry what it looks like when we come to use it. So you can see there we've massively simplified, and we could send anything in here. You could use this API for any kind of data. So, that now is our standard way of pulling data in from any API. So, we didn't even need to create a Ruby specific one here. Which we've done for this demo, but it could just be ingest data, and then we can select what the source device was from the JSON itself.
That's excellent. And Stuart, has that gone even simpler in the latest cut with JSON and Soda, or this is still the preferred way?
Well, with Soda, you don't even need to create the API. So basically, you Soda enable your table, your JSON table, and then Soda has automatically created an API link. So where you've created one here through ORDS, Soda enables us just to write literally to the table without creating any APIs at all. The APIs already exist. So look, it's massively simplified. We're about to add a JSON data type to the Oracle 21. I think it's been backported to 19. If I'm right, I might be wrong there. Someone can correct me. But essentially, we'll have, rather than use a clob, will actually be a JSON data type. But I believe that this command will be exactly the same. So you don't really care what it looks like now. I like this because I don't need to convert. Before we had to convert a blob that you got from the REST API into a clob. And, for me, not as a database guy, tongue in cheek, that was all too hard. So I had to copy other people's code. Now I don't need to.
Yeah, that's great.
The other thing I would do, by the way, is I wouldn't be showing people what our database URL looks like, and I'd be using API Gateway on the front of it just to add a bit of security, because we've obviously, for this demo, people will notice that we've just removed the authentication just to get this through nice and simple. But normally we'd add a bit of authentication in there, and we'd potentially use API Gateway just to have a little bit of that buffer in terms of the load balance type functionality. But we can add capability in API Gateway to do things like authentication as well.
So this is where we had a bit of a conversation beforehand about this topic, that there could be different ways that we would secure the IoT device, which is currently connected through a public network, but that in itself could be plugged into a private network, could then use things such as Fast Connect to then connect back into a private endpoint and autonomous. So there's definitely different ways and different channels that we can
look, for a more enterprise use case, obviously there would be a lot more security, even on the device end, where it might even be encrypted data between that and the gateway. So we're using a Raspberry Pi as a gateway. Those that are, that have been down this conversation before, would you use a Raspberry Pi as a gateway in a production environment? You could. Would you? Possibly not. But you can make it more resilient. Obviously, it's a very cheap computer. There are different ways to do that. A lot of organizations and devices have their own gateways. So you end up doing a cloud to cloud. With this kind of approach, though, cloud to cloud becomes a lot easier to manage the API connection between any device partner. So you don't have to worry about, things changing and being, updated over time. We have to keep fixing it. So cloud to cloud, like I say, a lot of device partners would have their own cloud implementation. So having that connection back into Oracle makes it quite nice and easy. And in fact, I had a conversation with a drone manufacturer yesterday who for what they do, everything's encrypted, all goes into their cloud. And we were just talking about how do we get it out of your cloud into ours.
Yeah, and it's probably a segue into a future session between yourself and Tim Hickey around the roving edge device.
Absolutely.
Which I think we're going to do next week. So let's hope that occurs, and we'll also include Jason Grogan. Another topic that I know David Reed suggested is, hey, could we include something like anomaly detection? That is, hey, what happens if someone takes, like, hey, that freezer currently drops in temperature, or someone takes the gin and puts it in the fridge, etc. What do we do? So, between API security, device security, anomaly detection, there's a few extra topics here.
Because some of those things, probably going back a little bit, we'd be looking at an event-driven architecture, and even nowadays with the more common Oracle streaming service and streaming analytics, and that's probably where a lot of those things that you talk about, those anomaly detections, that's probably where some of those things could actually happen.
Yeah.
And you raise a good point, because I think this goes back to a number of conversations, and especially when we talk to customers and we talk about, look, we want data. It's very difficult for customers to share data, and we absolutely understand that, of course. So in many cases, we just create our own. And this is a kind of method we do, and it lets us focus on the use of the data, not on getting data. Because we know that we can get data. We know that in a particular instance, we know we can get data from a device or from a system, whether it's event-driven or not. But it allows us to focus on that, the actual use case. And it might be, that whole rule-based notifications and event-driven, or it might be analytics, or it might be anomaly detection. So I think, let's focus on that piece, using the data, which is really where we should be focusing, not on getting data in. This for us is a tool we use. I mean, I don't think there's there's not many engagements I play in now where I don't use a tool like this just to create myself some data so that I can focus on what the technology does or how to use it.
And I think the combination, exactly how you kicked off early in this conversation, the combo of things like JSON, REST APIs, SQL, autonomous, Apex, they sound like different technologies, but they work so well together if you're interested in speed of execution and change of direction and doing more with your data. So, yeah, I think I think that's what I've been picking up with this tech for the last couple of years.
Which is a good point, because those 5 boxes you've got in that cloud are actually one thing.
Yeah.
It's just one thing. It's 5 bits inside the one thing, but they're all part of the autonomous database. So, we get to use all of that capability inside there.
Yeah. Okay, I think we will wrap it up there in